Howdy crew, this is Nathan Donnelly with Northwest Resilience, contestant on Alone Season 6, and I wanted to do a commentary on Episode 2. I just uploaded a backstory on Episode 1 that you can find a 3-part video on. I did quite a bit in depth on. That's the episode that I was introduced in, and it's been a long time on it. I recommend checking it out if you'd like to do more. I'm going to do an Episode 3 next, and hopefully by the end of this week I'll be caught up with the whole season up till Episode 10, which is airing tonight. I just watched the both Episodes 2 and 3 with this notepad handy, and took notes along the way. So I'm just going to kind of go through. It's not like a recap of the. It's not a recap of the entire show. It's kind of these things that really caught my eye as an insider, I guess you could say, like things that when I was researching to get on the show myself, I rewatched all the old seasons with a real investigative eye and tried to look through the editing, tried to look through even the mindset of the people who the previous participants, and pick up little things that might be helpful to me later on. Little things I just noticed about their mindset, or a skill that they were doing, or a mistake that might be avoided, anything like that. So Episode 2 is going to be a little bit of like me just kind of picking it apart like that, and then also appreciating the level of skill and fortitude and integrity of the people who are on the show. You don't go into this without a high degree of all of those things. This isn't a criticism of anybody on the show. If it comes off that way, I apologize right off the bat, because I have the deepest respect for everybody who went out there for any amount of time. It was just to get to the point of being on the show was a gargantuan task, and took a long time, I know, for me to get to that point. 22,000 people applied for season 6, and none of us got there casually. So Episode 2, excuse me, opens up with Donnie. Donnie is a really neat guy. I got to hang out with him and all the other participants for close to 3 weeks when you add up boot camp and orientation camp before we ended up getting deployed. Donnie looks like he's got a pretty nice area, fairly forested, a little bit of slope to it. It looks like it's fairly sheltered from oncoming weather and wind and stuff. I was pretty well paying attention to that for my own needs when I was selecting a site, because the landscape over there is pretty open, and the wind can just tear through there fiercely, and adding wind chill on top of the already extremely cold temperatures is something that I did not want to contend with. So there's a saying when you're doing shelter, is that a good shelter in a bad location is a bad shelter. And he looked like he had a pretty good site for his. He was building off of trees that were living and standing there on site. So he was using some of what was already there. So you have to do it himself, which is efficient. He had a really cool resource up there, which I didn't really have. It seems like a lot of other people did. I know Ray did a really great job with this, and that's this sphagnum moss here. I was in a muskeg area, which had some moss, but it was really marshy, and what I had a lot of was reindeer lichen, and that stuff, when it dries up, just becomes crunchy and doesn't have the the squishiness of sphagnum. It's not like a mulch. Like Donnie called it the Arctic hide. You're able to take that stuff and lift up big sheets of it and then use it like a insulative batting. And I really didn't have that resource in my spot, so it's pretty cool that some people did have it. If you've ever heard of Dick Prinicky, he's a gentleman who went up to Alaska, I think in the 60s, and lived up there for quite a few number of years. built an amazing log cabin all with hand tools, filmed himself. It's kind of like the beginning, the beginning of the genre of filming yourself in a survival situation, pre-Les Stroud by decades actually, and made this amazing log cabin. And he had that Arctic hide to go off. If he could go, he actually made wove something together so he could carry big bats of it over to his cabin, and I believe that's how he insulated his roof. It's pretty cool being able to see when the camera zooms in on our camp and our big name is up there in big tall letters. I'm able to see what our bays look like, our different waterways and all that. And Donnie looks like he's on some deep water, which is pretty cool. I know that I and Wonia at least did not have deep water, and that made for making fishing hard. Like I had to walk a half mile to get to deep water to find a place to deploy my net, for example. And I don't know that Wonia was able to do any fishing at all, really, because the water. Wonia was one of my neighbors, and while we were far enough apart that we didn't know that either one of us was there, some of the conditions in the water seemed pretty similar between the two of us. Donnie has got, if you see the helicopter fly over the drone, deep, dark water, not far offshore, and he looked like it might have been better for fishing than some other places, but just knowing one thing from an aerial view, you don't really know anything. Donnie is a neat guy. He is extremely well trained, and in the back of my mind, I knew he was like in the top 3 contenders of our group. Of who was going to go the distance out there, who had the most potential. I definitely had my eye on Donnie quite a bit. The guy is trained, he's smart, he's capable, and had I known, I knew a little bit about him then, and I already took him very seriously. Had I known then what I know about him now, I would have been taking him damn seriously, because the guy has been around, and he's an extremely gifted flint napper. He's got a really good YouTube channel where he will show you, the art of what he does as a flint napper, as well as a lot of really great survival videos. I recommend checking it out. He's also the author of the book Scavenger, which I think he just released in January. He got out of there and somehow still was able to publish a book within a few months. So pretty neat guy. It's neat to follow him on this episode. Really hard to see him go later on. Jordan comes up next, and Jordan's another guy that I could not take seriously. Jordan lived in Siberia for 5 years with the Evenki people. He was a reindeer herder. He was a trapper, which also meant that he was a hunter and a fisherman. You don't live that lifestyle without becoming very adept at those things. So it was really apparent during boot camp that Jordan knew how to do traps, and he wasn't doing pretty Boy Scout traps with chamfered edges and stuff. He would be able to take sticks and break them with his hands, and I think he does a snare actually in season 2 or 3 where there doesn't look like there's a knife cut in the whole kit, and he's got a really nice snare built up, and it's just sticks that he broke with his hands. That's somebody who's a natural at that sort of thing. That's something I would be looking out for with Jordan. The guy can bring in food with traps. That's no doubt, and I cannot do that. That's not in my wheelhouse. I live in the lower 48, and primitive trapping is not legal pretty much anywhere. You can do it with steel traps, and that would definitely be a better experience for me, but that's not in my wheelhouse either. I know how to mechanically make traps. I know the principles of hunting and tracking and how to potentially put those together to be a trapper, but there's certain things about trapping that unless you've done it, you don't really know. You don't know that you have to put out 100 to 500 traps to really subsist yourself on trapping. 100 to 500 traps. That's kind of incredible, and it takes miles of land to do it, and miles of walking every day to do it. So that's one thing. That's one of the reasons that I didn't take wire as one of my 10 items, is because although I really want to learn that skill, that's a big skill to learn, and I was an infant in that regard. I don't think that Jordan or Michelle can be said that they're anything but very experienced with trapping, and I'm really curious about how that comes along. Jordan's also a pretty good shot with a bow. during orientation camp, we had occasion to set up an old cardboard box full of stuff for a target and get some practice in before we were all deployed. And I remember Ronia saying in one of her videos that she thought Jordan was the best shot in the group, and I personally thought I was the best shot in the group, but I never did shoot with Jordan. There were a few folks that could put an arrow where it needed to go, and Jordan's definitely one of them. So that's another thing to look out for. Jordan also his sight was placed in an old wildfire burn. When they flew us into orientation camp from Yellowknife, we had a good long flight, 45 minutes or an hour or so, to get into to production camp, and we flew over a burn that went on forever and ever and ever. Just dead black trees standing with 3 to 4 feet of really bright lush green growth coming up from below that. And I was looking at that with some excitement. I'm a naturalist. I have a bit of a background in forest ecology, in fire ecology, and I have been a wildland firefighter too. I've been into areas that have burned and seen them a year, 2, 3, 4 years later, and how they recover. And it's really a beautiful thing. Forest fires, you know, get a lot of people who haven't been around fire kind of think of them as a natural disaster, and what they are is a natural process. It's a part of how the forest renews itself, and when you get all that bright green flush of growth coming, that means that there's something that are going to want to eat it. And Jordan was a bit dismayed about it. I don't think he quite realized at the time how much of a benefit that was to be put down in the burn. My site didn't have any burn at all. I found 2 or 3 pieces of of charred wood that looked like they were from a fire 50 years previous. So I was in a much denser forest type, and my kind of head in the game with that is that as temperatures really dropped and the wind really began to howl, animals would want to come to the denser forest and to the lower valley areas like where I was for shelter. And so I was kind of, my game plan early on was to think about deep winter and those animals wanting to get out of that open exposed burn area. Nikki starts off coming out and sees her lynx, and which is an amazing experience. I wish I would have got a chance to see a lynx up there. They're incredible animal. They're kind of like ghosts. She sees her lynx and she goes into talking about why being in the wilderness is the thing for her. You know, how it's not a place that you keep schedules. It's not a place that you do. She wakes up early in the morning and realizes she needs more sleep, wants to sleep in more. She's not a morning person. And she can do that. You know, it's not that she's got an alarm clock yelling at her or a boss or somebody else. She can do what she feels like she needs to do. If she's going to get up early, it's because she's disciplined and has something to do that she wants to do. And there's something pretty cool about that. I talked about it a little bit in my last video, and I'll talk about it in future videos too. But to live by your own discipline and your own wits and your own personal development is a pretty amazing freedom, and the wilderness is one of those few places that's left to really do that without making other people mad while you do it, I guess. So I really appreciated the kind of the philosophy that she had at the beginning there, that luckily they edited in. She understands also self-imposed limitations. She says something to the effect that, you know, I don't know that we actually have limitations. I think that we place those on ourselves. And I couldn't agree more with her. We think we know things as human beings, and we don't know shit. When it comes down to it, none of us can tell the future. None of us know what's happening on in the world. We don't know, I don't know right now that an asteroid's not going to strike me dead, you know, any second now. It's just, we don't really know. We have ideas and we decide we know facts, and then we decide our reality based on those facts that we think we know. And oftentimes, very often, those facts become limitations on what we believe is possible. And we're just not omniscient. We can't really decide that we know reality, and I think Nikki does a pretty good job of saying that. She ends up cutting her hand. She's putting together a trap. Her knife slips off of a piece of wood that she's kind of leveraging on a little bit, and comes off right across the back of her left hand knuckle. And I have a scar in the exact same place. I'm a wood carver, and I probably cut myself there several times when I was younger as a carver. The left hand gets it, man. When you're carving, the tool hand is always safe. The left hand is the one that gets cut, and she had a little bit of a slip. It's hard to stay focused when you're also thinking about cameras and angles and all that other stuff, and stuff happens. But she catches herself in a spiral of like, this could be a thing that taps me. It is pretty much down to the bone, it looked like. It opened up a little C shape, cut in her knuckle, bled really well, and she, you know, grabs for the phone and thinks that it might be a tap event, and catches herself and decides that she's going to deal with it. Realizes it, you know, she doesn't really know if this is a tap out thing, and she's not gonna give up already. So that I thought was maybe a beneficial event for her. She caught herself and decided to go the other way, and we all had plenty of opportunities to do that while we were out there. And if you're reaching for, you know, reasons to leave instead of reasons to stay when you have excuses to leave, then you're not going to stay out there for very long, and it becomes almost a habit. Like, there is, you know, a reason every week to think about getting the heck out of there. It's an awful, awful place in a lot of ways, or it's not, you know, for the soft, cold human body it is. And yeah, she, I think, sets a tone for herself that's going to serve her well later on through the season. I do not expect that Nikki would ever tap out voluntarily. She's not leaving unless she has to. She's not leaving unless it's, you know, unless it'd be stupid to stay. And I'd expect to see that for her through the season. Ray comes in next. Ray is a super good guy. I think I might have, of all the men on the show, I think I might have connected with Ray more than just about anybody else during boot camp, and especially orientation. He is just a neat guy, and luckily he lives not super far from me in southern Washington, so hopefully we get to hang out sometime. But he's a really good guy. He and I were paired up during boot camp, the process through which we were going to get chosen for the show. And the way boot camp works is all the people who applied, there's, I guess, 22,000 of us for season 6. They whittled that down to 22 people for our season, and picked 10 of us to be on the show. And Ray and I got paired up for a rabbit thing where we had to kill a rabbit and gut it, cook it, you know, prepare the whole thing. They needed to know, they needed to see that we could process an animal from, you know, through the whole thing. And they only had so many rabbits, so they only had like 10 rabbits or something like that, and there was 22 of us. So we got paired up, and I was paired with Ray, and Ray grabs that rabbit to kill it, and he slams it up against the boulder like he means to kill the boulder, not the rabbit. I mean, he was intent on killing that thing like that. Ray is not a soft man. He's very sweet, but he also understands blood. He understands killing. He understands survival. And I knew that about him right away after that point. So that comes into play a little bit later on in this episode. But Ray's a really neat guy. He starts off pretty early on noticing that seagulls kind of checking out this part of the water near his camp, and takes that as a cue to start fishing there, and lands a pretty significant sized lake trout pretty early on. And he lands it in a way that is one of the things that I caught. Like, he doesn't kind of like bring it to the shore and then reach down and grab it. He brings it and yanks it the hell out of the water so that it lands 5 feet behind him on dry land, so that thing isn't going to pop off of this hook at the last second. That's how you land a fish when you don't have a net, when you don't have a gaff hook, when you're using barbless hooks. Like, he understood the gravity of what it meant to get that thing out of the water as quickly as possible. And That's just one of those little details that caught my eye, and I think I've seen, catch up to people in future season or past seasons where, that fish just comes off right at your fingertips, and it's got to be such a heartbreaking thing to have happen. I was a little bit concerned. Ray made this ridiculously amazing heavy coat out of a Scottish Highland cowhide. It had like 4-inch long hair on it. He brushed mink oil into it. It was amazing. I did have a little bit of concern over the mobility of it. I remember we were out shooting archery together. This was his warm coat, and it definitely was going to be warm. He had a fox tail collar sewn into it as well, but he wasn't able to shoot his bow with that thing on because it was cowhide. It was thick leather underneath that fur, and something like that, needs to be tailored in just the right way in order to wear it in an active hunting lifestyle. And for trapping and stuff, probably be great, but I didn't know what he was going to do when it came to the point where it got so cold that he had to wear that thing all the time. He still needed to be able to use his bow. Donnie comes in next again with the quote from the military that I thought was very astute and worth remembering if you're somebody who thinks that when the shit hits the fan, you're going to turn into Rambo and save the day when you haven't actually done any training, haven't done any planning, and you're a soft, pudgy person who hasn't done any exercise either. Chances are the fantasy in your head that you think is how things are going to play out probably isn't. And Donnie's quote is, "The first thing to die in combat is the plan." When you're engaged with an enemy, things don't unroll the way that your brain thinks they're gonna, and you have to adapt. The whole point of that quote is saying, don't rely on plans, rely on your ability to roll with it, to change, to look at the situation anew, use your imagination, and not panic. There's no situation that can't be made worse by panicking, because when you panic, you lose the ability to use your imagination. Your frontal lobes of your brain shut down, and you go into a fight, flight, or freeze situation, and you cannot think on your toes anymore. So the whole idea of that quote is to, keep on your feet. And Donnie understands that. Donnie also, another thing that I think probably most viewers would find boring is they have the camera on him for about 10 seconds just before he shoots his muskrat, and he sits down on a log or something. He's got his bow at the ready in his lap, and he just goes still. He even closes his eyes and kind of like rocks his head back a little bit and takes in the environment around him with his ears and his nose. And there's an old Fred Bear quote that says something to the effect of, "The best camouflage is sit down and be quiet." There's all this fancy camouflage that I had on, that I know Jordan has got the best, Tim's got the best camouflage out there, pretty amazing stuff. Like, my camera would not even focus on me sometimes because my camouflage matched the lichen behind me so perfectly that I disappeared even to the camera, so it wouldn't autofocus. Donnie's out there in like a Mexican poncho hoodie type thing, and then he goes quiet. And that's more important than the best camouflage in the world. He zeroes in, and almost right away he hears a rodent probably 30 or 40 yards away on the shore, a little muskrat, because he quieted down. And he heard that, he got up, he went after it, and he got the animal. I thought that's what hunting is to me. That's how my grandfather taught me to hunt. I tend to be a little bit more active when I hunt, but I also still hunt as well. But my grandfather will sit on the side of a hill and watch the far side of the hill for deer for the entire day and be calm and be still for the whole thing. And he will go home with a deer. Eventually something's going to walk through there and he'll take it. So if you're a hunter and you think that the act of hunting is to have a knife in your teeth